Moving to Idaho? Be prepared and don't let Idaho catch you by surprise. Here are 10 things newcomers don't always expect. Being unprepared for these can sometimes lead to problems. Now, this first one probably won't affect most of you, but just in case, I present Idaho surprise number 1. A very persistent internet rumor is that Idaho law prohibits fishing from the back of a camel or giraffe. The good news is that this isn't true. You can fish from the back of a camel or giraffe in Idaho if you are so inclined. Were any of you actually planning to do that? Idaho code addresses the importation of livestock, including camels, and giraffes are also mentioned in that Camel Creek and its tributaries are off limits for fishing. So go ahead, bring your camel and fishing gear to Idaho, but don't expect to legally fish in Giraffe Creek. Okay, now that we've got the totally bizarre items out of the way, let's look at Idaho surprise number 2. This one may sound like more internet myth, but it is absolutely true. Our state capitol building here in Boise, as well as some 90 other homes and businesses in the downtown area, are heated at very low cost by geothermal heat. In other words, by natural hot water from deep beneath the Earth's surface. The Boise Warm Springs Water District is the oldest geothermal district in the U.S., dating back to the late 1800s. Sidewalks in downtown Boise benefit from geothermal snow removal. The original natatorium public swimming pool was geothermally heated, and the beautiful Victorian mansion known as the Moore Cunningham House on Warm Springs Avenue was the first home in the United States to be heated with natural hot water. In fact, Warm Springs Avenue is well worth walking on a spring or fall afternoon. It's lined with gorgeous old homes from Boise's earlier history, as well as some more recent mansions, including one designed inside and out to look like a medieval castle with crenellated walls. As a realtor with John L. Scott Real Estate here in Boise, I'm always fascinated by the architecture on display on Warm Springs Avenue. So do check it out when you visit Idaho, and I do encourage you to visit before moving. Number 3, and this one's related to that second Idaho surprise, and that is that Idaho has an amazing number of hot springs, and more of them are soakable, which is another way of saying the water is clean and not so hot that it burns your toes off, than in any other state. Idaho has about 340 natural hot springs, with 130 of them being soakable, so that's a lot of hot water. Nevada has more hot springs overall, but most are not safely usable. Idaho's hot springs can be found throughout the state. Some are privately owned and will charge a fee for use. Most hot springs are located on public lands and are free to use, other than a day use fee for entering that particular natural forest, natural park, or wilderness. Many require a long hike to reach, even several days of backpacking, while others are easily accessible for people of any age or degree of disability. Unfortunately, as Idaho has grown in population, some of our more easily accessible hot springs are becoming overcrowded, and problems with people drinking alcohol in the springs or tossing trash around the pool have increased. By all means, come visit our hot springs, but please help Idahoans keep these beautiful natural resources clean and safe for everyone. Idaho surprise number 4, and this one really shouldn't come as a surprise if you paid attention to numbers 2 and number 3. The surprise is that Idaho's geothermal activity is directly connected to the same tectonic forces that created Yellowstone National Park and the so-called Yellowstone supervolcano. And yes, if the supervolcano were to produce a really catastrophic eruption, Idaho would be covered with a couple feet of volcanic ash, among other things. Geologists say that's not very likely, at least not in our lifetime, but every now and then a sensationalist bit of news on the internet will warn that Idaho is in peril, etc., etc. I personally don't spend time worrying about it, but it is interesting to study the volcanic and tectonic forces that created our beautiful state. In particular, you should take a trip to Craters of the Moon National Monument in eastern Idaho. There you can see for yourself what Mother Nature can create through these powerful forces. It's a really cool place to take kids too. Surprise number 5, taxes. Just in case you weren't paying attention, Idaho has a 6% sales tax on pretty much everything, from cars to groceries. So far, we've resisted any effort to assess sales tax on the purchase and sale of a home, and as a realtor, I'm very glad about that. Home buyers have to pay a lot for an Idaho home right now, and having having to pay sales tax on top of the home price would certainly add insult to injury and make it harder for people to buy. We've also got property taxes, although you can get a partial tax reduction, that's known as a homeowner's exemption or a homestead exemption, for the home that you live in, but not for properties that you rent out. Property taxes vary from city to city and county to county, just as much as they do from state to state. So it's impossible for me to say that your property taxes in Idaho would be less than your taxes in another state. So comparisons really depend on the exact place where you're moving, where you're coming from, and where you plan to live in Idaho. One thing a competent realtor can tell you is how much tax was assessed on a particular property in the previous year. That's helpful if it's a resale. That kind of info is public data here in Idaho, so use it to your advantage. Don't hesitate to ask a realtor to get you that kind of information. Okay, surprise number 6. On Sundays, be prepared for some stores and restaurants to be closed, especially in smaller towns. Don't get caught off guard if you're traveling outside of Idaho's urban areas on a Sunday. Make sure you've got plenty of gas and bring a packed lunch just in case. Hey, by the way, if this video is helpful to you, please give it a like, leave a comment, or better yet, subscribe to my channel. If you're a troll, please don't bother. All right, number 7. You can't ride a bicycle, whether electric or non-electric, in a designated wilderness area. In fact, you can't use a vehicle of any kind in a wilderness area, so stick to hiking. That's actually true of all wilderness areas in the U.S., but especially important to know in a state like Idaho, where some 4.8 million acres of our public land are wilderness. We've got a lot of wilderness here in Idaho. Okay, Idaho surprise number 8. You better watch out for Bigfoot, also known as Sasquatch, when hiking and camping in the Gem State. Idaho has plenty of Bigfoot believers and about 100 recorded sightings, some of them not far from Boise. Note that I didn't say confirmed, I just said recorded. That's not nearly as many sightings as our Pacific Northwest neighbors in Oregon, California, and Washington, but it's still quite a few. We even have a professor at Idaho State University named Jeff Meldrum who has made a name for himself trying to prove that Sasquatch exists. Now, Meldrum is a full professor of anatomy and anthropology at ISU, and he's an expert on foot morphology and locomotion, that's walking, in primates. So if anyone is in a position to prove through science that Bigfoot is really out there, it would be Jeff Meldrum. Stay tuned on this one. The jury is still out. Surprise number 9. If you've never lived in a place where open carry of firearms is legal and fairly common, well, some aspects of Idaho life might take you by surprise. For example, you might walk into a Lowe's hardware store here in Boise and find a guy carrying a hunting rifle while browsing for a new toilet seat. And this is something I saw once myself here in Boise. When I was growing up as a kid in Idaho, it wasn't unusual to see pickup trucks with a gun rack in the rear window in a parking lot somewhere, holding a couple of shotguns or rifles. Now, you don't see that as much nowadays, I think because people are more worried about the risk of theft or an accidental discharge, but it used to be fairly common. So, a word of advice. Firearms laws vary from state to state and can be very confusing. So please read up on the latest Idaho laws before you arrive if you're planning to own a firearm. Finally, number 10. We Idahoans freely admit that we have some of the weirdest place names in the United States, if not the world. We have towns called North Pole, Freeze, Riddle, Ozone, and Santa, not to mention Wolverine and Squirrel. Frozen Dog Road in Emmett and Chicken Dinner Road in Canyon County both have strange stories, maybe true, maybe not, explaining their origins. You can find several hills or buttes called Molly's Nipple here in Idaho, although admittedly you can find that same place name in other parts of the West, the U.S. West as well. That Molly must have really made an impression on the cartographers of the Old West. Idaho places named Gross, Dingle, Bone, Slickpoo, and China Hat may raise eyebrows in more refined company. I love the fact that Idaho has tiny towns named Bliss and Good Grief, but I try to avoid Appendicitis Hill. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed this video and learned some useful info that will help you when you come to check out Idaho before you make your move. Thanks for watching.